I'm absolutely delighted to be welcomed once again by Anna Danylchuk, or Anna from Ukraine, as you probably know her. Now, this is an unscripted episode. We're going to talk a bit about my impressions of Ukraine, which I've just returned from, and other things as well, because goodness, there's almost nothing to talk about in the world right now. We're really going to struggle for topics, aren't we?
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be with your community, and I'm super excited to talk about your trip to Ukraine. It's actually the second one, and it's amazing that you know so much about my country, not just from this global outside analytics, but from inside.
It's nice as well, and it's nice that I knew so much about Ukraine theoretically from our conversations before I went in 23, and now this is a much longer trip, and I've been to Kyiv for the first time. In fact, technically, I've been to Ukraine three times because, as we were chatting a minute ago, I had to actually enter Ukraine with some trucks. Something went wrong. We had to leave and come back in again. So that's, technically it's three trips to Ukraine. But anyway, it's two proper ones.
Yeah, and we have practiced, and Jonathan can pronounce Kyiv.
Kyiv, Kyiv. There we go. When I'm talking, I'll forget to sort of say that. But, you know, I did
What
learn
trips
one.
to Kyiv?
I did learn one
That's
word, "Daka дуже." So that was my little
perfect.
word that I learnt. But no, I need to make some progress. And I showed this earlier. I think this is going to be a great way to learn Ukrainian. This is the book produced by General Valery Zaluzhny. If he's watching, I'm going to use this to learn Ukrainian.
Yeah, that is a good choice to learn both the Ukrainian language and the Ukrainian spirit.
And it's interesting because I had kind of assumed that I understood about, 10 or 20% of Ukrainian, but that percentage rises and falls based on whether you sort of know what's being talked about. So I went to an event at Penn, Ukraine, where they had some poets from the 1920s from the Kharkiv region. And so they had some famous musicians and a rapper and poets reading these poetry from Kharkiv in the 20s, all in Ukrainian. None of them were in Russian. But actually, because I was sort of, really concentrating and getting a sense of what was being said, I reckon it was about sort of 30, 40% of the theme of these poems was kind of comprehensible. So that's very encouraging.
The more you travel to Ukraine, the more words and attitudes you will know. But I'm actually happy that you were present at this event because Ukrainian literature in the 20s and 30s was amazing.
Yes, I really, got this thirst to try and follow up on that and read it. And of course, there was the fantastic sight of Volodymyr Ermolenko playing the keyboard, which I wasn't expecting as well. So he had a sort of little impromptu jazz accompaniment to the poetry. So that was quite some experience, and I think this is important. People get a sense of the intensity of life as it's lived, especially by sort of cultural people, educated people like yourself, and those involved in civic society. She had a room absolutely packed with people, writers and poets, and those who are interested in cultural stuff. And of course, the Penn office is quite high and is quite prominent on a hillside. So you look out over the city, and one would assume it's potentially sort of elevated danger as well because you're higher there at sort of drone height. And of course, the air raid siren goes off during the poetry reading. No one moved. Everyone just, poetry, far more important. Everyone sat, listened, and, no one got up or interrupted it. And that's not, I think, because they're being sort of blasé or ignoring the danger. I think there's a certain stubbornness and resilience that's being demonstrated by that.
True, but partially when you live for 3 years already in this full-scale war environment, unfortunately, you do lose this feeling of danger to some extent. And that was actually what worried me about your trip to Kyiv, because Kyiv is the city that unfortunately can get seriously targeted, not just with drones, but also with ballistic missiles. And here, listen to me, not just with drones, which drone can cause a lot of harm. And I do not share a lot about that on the channel, but people do ignore air raid alerts. Why? Because perhaps you've counted how many of them you have per day or per week, and how they
Two or three a
actually,
day,
yeah,
definitely.
they stop everything. They may stop, for example, the work of underground on those parts that are above the ground, banks, schools, everything like this. State organizations, they are forced to follow the rules, which is right. So, for example, school children always go underground, but people listen, and I do have a lot of friends telling like, okay, I hear explosions, but they are very far away, so we can continue working. Just imagine saying something similar in like Washington.
Yes.
That's insane. That's not good. But unfortunately, like you have to adapt, and that is one of these adapting mechanisms to ignore some of the dangers, to continue your work, to continue your life.
And we were in the hotel Ukraine off Maidan. So we stayed there for, I think it was 3 nights. And then we stayed in a hostel, so quite a nice little hostel hotel in Padil for a couple of nights as well. But while we're in Hotel Ukraine, of course, the sirens go off, but also apparently a drone came quite close to the center of the city, which of course it's an area with a lot of government buildings as well. We don't talk about exact locations, but we know there are a lot of government buildings around that area. And then, of course, the POVO, the air defense went off. And because we're quite high up on a view facing Maidan Square, of course, the sound of the anti-aircraft fire going off resonates and echoes around the entire square. The noise was deeply intense and shocking. And then the next day, then again, there's a certain blasé sort of thing that I got where it's just like, should I go in the corridor or I should I just get back in bed and sleep because I'm very tired? And then one of my colleagues said the next morning over breakfast that he'd actually heard distinctly the sound, the sort of lawnmower sound of the drone that actually had been potentially quite close to the hotel. So
If you can hear the sound, it is already quite close. What is interesting is that you do learn how to distinguish the sound of your air raid alert working and of something evil targeting the location nearby. I was surprised that, like, after the second or the third experience, my ears, which are not very musical, could clearly see, oh, that's ours. That's a good sound. That's a bad sound. And I will tell a funny story for your friends. I don't know if you have experienced that in the hotels, but some of the Ukrainian hotels, for example, in Lviv, they have a built-in function apart from the air raid alert. You will hear a voice talking in your room, like an air raid alert, please take things and move into the
yep, yeah, we
shelter.
had that as well. Yeah.
And I remember hearing it for the first time at night, like when you have a very strong male voice in your room and you're like, what's happening? And like we don't have that like in Kyiv or Lutsk, but I've experienced that in Lviv and I was terrified with the voice.
Yeah, who's this? Get out of my room.
Big brother talking to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do use a very commanding kind of penetrating voice, which is kind of
Very
scary.
loud and it's literally everywhere in the room.
That's it. And Hotel Ukraine has a very kind of Soviet Politburo kind of feeling to it as well. So it added that slightly sort of cold retro experience to it, which was slightly weird. Padil, of course, is much more cozy. And I think that's one of the big sort of, there's a couple of sort of surprises because, I've seen endless photographs of Kyiv and imagined visiting and what it would be like. But it was so much more, it was so much less flat than I expected. How should I say it? The hills are really hilly and the churches are really even more stunningly beautiful than the photographs can suggest.
I have read one funny comment somewhere in the Toxic Act saying that since recently President Trump keeps repeating that Ukraine is very plain. Ukraine is very plain and beautiful. It's good that he changed the narrative from totally demolished and destroyed. You witnessed it's not. But now many people say, how do we tell him that Ukraine is not that flat, that there are actually lots of like mountains in the Crimea, in the Carpathians, and Kyiv, and many other cities.
Yeah.
They are quite hilly. And others telling, do we really need to tell him this? Let him
Does he
think
need
it.
the details, really?
That's like good. So, but in general, yes. And many people like Kyiv is one of the ancient cities in Europe, and many like old chronicles, they describe that sailing to Kyiv was very beautiful because the first thing you would see is old churches on the hills. So it's actually very hilly. And I do not like comparison to like, the Jerusalem or the Rome of Eastern Europe, but many do say it because of this like hills.
I love hills architecturally, especially when you get sort of 17th and 18th century architecture, which tends to work with the contours of the land. And you can see that certainly in Padil, a lot of that architecture dates from that period. There's a bit of 19th century stuff, but it's that period where they didn't seek to override the landscape, but they worked with the contours of the landscape. So it's incredibly beautiful. But we should talk about how to influence Trump. How should we influence Trump to support Ukraine and reject Russia? I think this is going to happen anyway over the next couple of months, but how can we accelerate it? And one thought came to me when I was there. Someone just needs to take him to Pozata Hata, and buy him a huge meal, and I think he'll be won over.
Oh, maybe. I don't know. I don't want to use this like stereotypes that exist about Eastern Europe and Trump and Melania. But I think Trump cannot be friends with Russia just because the United States will never share the same worldview as Russians do. And no matter how toxic, for example, US media can become or how turbulent things in the society, they still value human life about all. And you will hear Elon Musk talking about the need to protect like the life of American people. And in Russia, Putin treats his people as resources. And I think there will be a huge clash between these worldviews. And this is one of the reasons that makes me confident that no real alliance, no real friendship is ever possible between Americans and Russians.
And this is interesting. I like to put this question to you because one of the things I want to do, or I am actually starting to do, is so far on the channel, I've only had people who broadly I agree with or who have strong commonality with, so that when we debate the things that we disagree on, it's coming from a very solid point of agreement on other things, which is great. So I have quite a few, Republican friends from the US on the channel, and we disagree about a lot of stuff, but we agree about core things. And one of those, as you say, is Ukraine being the anti-Russia. And it really is. I know they use that in the propaganda, but it absolutely is the anti-Russia. You do not idolize your rulers. You do not like that extreme vertical way of doing things. And the last 30 years has been about deconstructing or de-Russifying, that way of managing society and the economy. So I think there's a lot there to attract Americans. The trouble is that discourse doesn't make it through to especially right-wing evangelicals. And what I want to do is to start debating them, not, going head to head on all the issues about Trump, but saying, look, your impression of Ukraine is wrong. Ukraine is closer to the vision that they might have for America than Russia is, and that is of somewhere where people have agency, where they can build businesses, where they want to reduce the power of the state, where they have traditional values and chemical-free food and blah blah blah. All this stuff. I want to start sort of debating people and injecting these ideas into that ecosystem.
I think that is a fantastic mission, and all of us here in Ukraine will be grateful for you doing that. Um, some may trust you even more than Ukrainians because many may consider that I'm being subjective, trying like to advertise my own country. And at the
And
same
being
time,
emotional. We know how emotional you
being
are, Anna, you
emotional,
know.
it will be actually funny to hear how I continue this thought. I think that people have become too emotional. And all these emotions, they actually harm the politics and the decisions. It's weird to hear this from like a Ukrainian in times of war, being a woman who many still consider stereotypically more emotional, but there is too much of that emotion. And that is why sometimes it's really difficult to shout your uh, opinion. And I totally agree that first, I hate it when politicians, for example, global opinion leaders who have never been to Ukraine, reason about Ukraine, our state at this time in a war, or our history, or our culture, without visiting Ukraine for a day even. I'm sure a lot of things changed in your attitude towards Ukraine after your visits. But even before that, you've been a smart person who read a lot, analyzed a lot. But there are so many people who have heard about Ukraine for the first time in 2022, know nothing, read nothing, have never been here, and they say like the cities are destroyed or the people are anti-Christian, when in reality Ukraine is just like the cradle of all these values you are trying to rediscover in your societies. Once again, we've discussed that. Maybe some of your viewers won't like it, but we still haven't had two genders. Nothing changed. There are too many churches on the Ukrainian streets, and people are actively visiting them. And these traditional values, come on. How can you speak about traditional values in Russia when you literally do not know the number of Putin's wives and lovers and children, and everything is hidden? And when
And also,
the
you should point out the divorce rate and the abortion rate in Russia is through the roof. I mean, it's the
and
highest
also the
in Europe.
alcoholism, I am not sure that alcoholism goes in line with the Christian lifestyle. And in Ukraine, it's very different. And you can see a lot of like figures, I mean, like crosses and religious sculptures, especially in the West, even standing on the crossroads. And people may go that crazy that in some villages they build small like chapels on the yards of their houses, which is, I think, actually too much. But Ukraine is very religious. Like many people know it about Poland being very Catholic and building lots of the decisions based on the faith. And Ukraine is just like Poland, but in Orthodox way. And it's insane how Russia tries to build this vision, but it's all very chaotic. And when you actually travel to Russia, you will see like no churches, drunk people in depressive regions, glorifying Stalin, who executed priests.
That's it. And, we don't have too much time on this one, but what surprised me hugely was in a particular village which I visited for various reasons. I was in that village a lot. And they had an 18th century church, so a church from sort of the era of Peter the Great or shortly after that, and it had been totally
Name him-
destroyed.
Let's name him Peter the First.
Peter the First, I'm sorry, I should. Yes.
Because he's not great.
No, he's not great. No, I really should have remembered that.
No, no, I'm just like playing with this because it
Yeah,
was also popular in Ukrainian history to name him the Great, but he's
yes.
not the Great. Let's
I
say
mean, it
just
could
like
be Peter the
second,
Scary,
Peter
Peter the Terrible, because he was culpable for many hundreds of thousands of deaths as well.
Peter, like the angry, or Peter, how do you name a person that is angry because he is not like reaching the level? I think he hated Ukrainian Mazepa because he knew he was worse than Mazepa and he could not level Mazepa's style and this atmosphere and intellect. So how do you call a person that is angry because he's not just like good enough?
That's it. Peter the chip on the shoulder kind of thing. Um, but this church was a sort of 18th century. You can imagine it had been quite a beautiful building, but in the 1930s it had been shot at and blown up by the communists, and then the German army had actually occupied the village. So you had Soviet artillery firing out at the church, and then the German artillery were using the spire of the church to, focus their weapons. So literally, it was just a pile of bricks. There was really nothing left of it. There was an overrun graveyard and just a pile of bricks, little else. But each summer I'd go to this village, they started building it up. One summer the entire brick structure had been built. And then the next summer, the cupola was built. And then finally, the last time I went there, they'd put the plaster on the walls, it had dried, and there were people painting frescoes. Really beautiful, sort of 18th century style frescoes on the outside and the inside of the church. But, and I think I might have told you this before, the painters were not ethnic Russian. They were Kazakhs and
Mm,
Tajiks.
mm.
They were all Muslim craftsmen painting Christian iconography and doing it very, very well. And I asked the people there, what on earth is going on? And they simply said, these are the only people who aren't blind drunk and that we can trust to kind of do the job. So not much has changed. In the 18th century, they paid Italians and Dutch and the English to build their infrastructure. And in the 21st century, they're paying Central Asians to do the same.
We can draw two very important conclusions here. First, that this media that glorifies Russian traditional values and Christianity forget about the huge, that like everybody knows, we don't need to explain, problem of alcoholism, which is not in line with Christian lifestyle. And number two, they have a tremendous problem built in the Russian Federation, together with this Ruski Mir doctrine, which cracks taking into account this multinationality of Russia, and not just how many immigrants they have in their society, and literally there was a joke, like not very politically correct, that Russia tries to describe that there are a lot of Russian people, let's say in Ukraine or in Lithuania, and we need to come and to freeze them. So then they are in danger because Tajikistan can come and liberate Moscow because there are more Tajiks on the streets of Moscow than the classical Muscovites. And that's okay for multinational world, and it's a kind of diversity that we can support. The problem is that it contradicts the doctrine of the Ruski Mir, which is about the Orthodox faith, but come on, Tatarstan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, there's so many Muslim or Buddhist communities, so many different languages, so many different family lifestyles, Chechnya. And it's interesting. I've watched one of the videos recently about this Chechnya Republic, and they always claim it's Russia, it's very Russia. And they were asking, like, this typical fun kind of video, they were asking girls on the streets, what man, what nationality would you like to marry? And they would say, like, I would like to marry our guy, not Russian. They were always saying, our guy, not Russian. So Moscow says that Chechnya is Russia, and I'm sure these girls may vote for Putin, but they have this huge crack, and they clearly know that Russian is not there. So I'm sure there are a million reasons apart from the Russian economy for this doctrine of Ruski Mir and huge, very unnatural federation to collapse in the coming years.
I think it is, and of course you've got the other argument that I'm going to be using with especially American libertarians and evangelicals is that if the corner of their philosophy is personal responsibility and the fact the state has got overpowerful and it denies people this responsibility they have to solve their own problems. Well, Ukraine is the best example in the world. where you have a government which actually can't solve a lot of the problems. It's physically incapable of solving all the problems. And it's emerging from this sort of Russified period, which means that it's not competent in all areas. And rather than sitting around feeling like victims, it seems to me a lot of Ukrainians will say, okay, no one's going to solve this problem unless I do something about it. And then they'll experiment and try. That strikes me as the absolute values of what people who voted for Trump say they believe in. But that there isn't this connection communicated. So that's one of the angles I'm gonna try.
That is a good angle because I see a lot of chaos here. You see, recently, like yesterday, Musk, who I'm sure is supported by MAGA people, he shared a tweet which is actually very worrisome for me, stating that America needs a new revolution. And there were millions saying yes, 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 which I don't think is the need. But it's funny how, once again, this totally insane people like Kennedy, I mean, like the one trying to take over the health system, and they claim that revolution in Ukraine was a coup funded by America. And how come you don't accept people changing everything in their own country up to their likings? You cannot hire millions of people, and we did not have TikTok propaganda at that time. And at the same moment, you want the same for your country. You say that that's what you need. So why it is okay for you to change everything, and it's not okay for us? And also, I think that's a huge problem that many people got tired with the American lifestyle, and they keep thinking that the Russian lifestyle is better and that anything that America could have potentially influenced is bad, but it's okay for Russia to influence. No, once again, people travel to Russia, live there, taste how you can never change anything there, that you become this like small people that they keep repeating. And I'm sure, like, once again, this tours, these exchange programs to Russia would definitely make all the Americans love US.
I think so. I can name some certain places to go as well. I can make some recommendations, you know. I'm sure there are a few communalki where we can put people. That's just communal apartments. They haven't all disappeared, and that would be an amazing experience for revelation. But no, I think that's that is the point. And my experience of living in Russia was to come back and say, okay, we have problems in the West, we have problems in Britain, and these problems need to be resolved. But being in Russia gives you a sense of perspective. And the perspective is that it's not all relative, that not all problems are the same, and our capacity to solve them is not all the same. The problems in Russia are of a different order of magnitude. The trauma, the historical trauma, is a different order of magnitude. The attitude to imperialism is completely different. And I think it's important to have that perspective because what Russian propaganda relies on is this relativism. Actually, nothing works. Everything's the same. The West is just as broken as Russia. We're broken, but you're broken. You're more broken than we are. All of that is clear nonsense if you've spent even, 5 minutes with your eyes open in Russia.
Exactly. And one more thing, that in the West, it's okay to speak about the problems and try to change them, sometimes choosing a bad way to change the situation. But in Russia, the state will tell you your problems mean nothing. And if you keep speaking about your problems, you're a traitor and we will come for you.
That's right. There are a lot of high windows, which, they have a lot of problems with windows there.
I
We should
have
remember.
been reading articles yesterday, and I did like one of the headlines saying something like, it's a very Russian say, like two Russian officials out of the window in one day, and so on. And I actually see people inventing words like de-windowization or just something like that to describe what's happening to Russians who actually see the reality.
Defenestration. I think that's a nice English word there.
Oh, defenestration. I'm sorry.
That's all right. That's quite a difficult sort of word there, but I'm thinking of how to include it in future episodes. Well, I know your time is up. This is a really short but intense episode. We'll have a longer chat very soon, and I know you've got to go and do bits and bobs. But yeah, huge pleasure to have you back on the channel, and we'll share more impressions of Kyiv. Uh,
Yes, you did
yeah,
it.
share more impressions in our next chat.
I want to thank you, Jonathan, and your team for all the amazing things that you do and bring to strengthen Ukraine, because it was not just a simple trip. It was a trip with the backup for the Ukrainian armed forces. And that's the best peace plan, which means to defeat and demilitarize Russia. I want to thank people of Britain for their unwavering support. And we actually do not need to explain to them why Russia must be defeated, and to all of your community for making us stronger, visible. And remember to let me know before your next visit so we plan some more things together.
Definitely will do. And I think the audience will enjoy that because we'll record lots of conversations and go to lots of fascinating places. Anna, thank you so much. Always an incredible delight speaking.
Thank you.